Harper's Kennel Stella, Missouri is proud to be sponsoring this portion of broadcasting on KNEO. Owned by Judy and Danny Harper, Harper's Kennel of Stella, Missouri specializes in French Bulldogs. For more information, the phone number is 417-628-3083.
Welcome to Crosspoint. An interactive program featuring ministers and leaders of the Christian community addressing the issues that are challenging the church today. Here's your host, Mark Taylor.
Artificial intelligence is the new electricity of our day. AI is radically transforming this world. Folks, welcome to Crosspoint. I'm Mark Taylor, your host, and it's great to have you here today. We're going to take an inside look at AI with Army Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis, who is a decorated officer from West Point, a graduate there. He's a columnist and also works for the National Security Strategies. And we want to welcome back to Crosspoint today Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Maginnis. We sure appreciate you taking time to be with us. And you've talked, you put out a book here on AI for mankind's future. And we sure are in a high-tech revolution. There's no doubt about it. Robert, I'd like to ask you a question here. It's on page 5, and I think it would help people to know when they get this book that they need to probably go there to help it explain just what AI is, because you talk about, the research and definitions of AI, and there's many different versions. And then you talked about one of the interesting ones that come from Chat GPT. So can you just kind of tell people what we're talking about, just so they understand AI, maybe if they can, anyway, a little better?
Generally speaking, it's a computer system designed to perform tasks that, often require human intelligence, like understanding language or recognizing images. Now, there are a lot of terms we'll use today, Mark, like machine language, deep learning, generative AI, agentic AI, LLMs, and so forth. It's a foreign language to a lot of us. If you use Alexa, Siri, or you call Amazon and talk to their machine, that's a low form, what I call a narrow AI. And there are levels of AI. And what's happening across the world is virtually everything is transforming to using AI as ostensibly to save on employment costs and to improve efficiency and so forth. So that being said, I think it's important for especially your Christian listeners, to put this in perspective. The story of technology doesn't begin in Silicon Valley, but it begins, if you know your Bible, at the plain of Shinar, which is near the city today in Iraq, south of Baghdad, called Hilla. That is where the great technological revolution began, at the Tower of Babel. Genesis 11, yes, that's true. And what they wanted to do, as your listeners well know, Mark, is that they wanted to build a tower of brick and mortar to basically declare humanity's independence from God. Well, that was the first of a long series of man trying to be God. And it was followed by the pyramids of Egypt, the libraries of Alexandria, the first printing press, the Industrial Revolution, certainly the successful atomic bomb tests, and so forth. And today, what we have is something that is just as revolutionary as any of those, and it has the same objective, and that is to put man, above everything else, to include God. A lot of people that understand AI are going to say, wow, I'm just exaggerating. Well, I would argue, no, I'm not, because I've read and studied much of what the experts and the futurists are saying about this. And what your listeners also need to understand, Mark, is that there are a couple of key issues here, and it's not as complex as some would say. We'll talk about algorithm. Algorithm is nothing more than a recipe. It's instructions on solving a problem to perform a particular task. Just like you would in the kitchen, you have to have instructions, you have to have ingredients, and that's precisely what AI is doing. It's taking instructions called algorithms It's taking ingredients called data that is locked in what we call large language models, and it is translating what I want through that algorithm, pulling the data together and answering my question. Now, that's simplistic. That's what Siri or Alexa does. However, what we are morphing into, which is something that I think everybody should be concerned about, is a higher level of artificial intelligence. It's not just generative AI like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, but it's artificial general intelligence. In other words, entities that are non-living, that are just as intelligent as any human being, can do all the reasoning and so forth. And the other part is something called singularity, super intelligence, that will be apart from humanity and really begin to control things without our input. Now, those are the levels. We're not there yet, but there's a lot of stuff that's out there that is trending in that direction. So that's a big picture, and I just wanted in AI for Mankind's Future to explain a little bit of these mechanics, but also to help people understand what AI really is and what it's not before we go forward, because this is something that's not going to go away.
No, that's definitely not. And, I noticed also here in the book that you did try to, and in fact, you've got the chapter, Education, is AI a boom or bust for learning? You're talking about how should we as Christians and as, having children and stuff like that, get involved with this, know about it. You say finally Christians need to be wise regarding how they engage AI, especially some good rules of thumb. And here on page 83 of the book, you've got a Christian's framework for evaluating AI in education. I think that's a real good thing to have, especially for parents that are concerned about how this is touching their children.
Absolutely. And our kids, believe it or not, are probably going to know more about this than we are because they're engaged in social media. Social media is just covered with AI. I would argue that there's more AI content on social media than it is human content these days, and that's incredibly dangerous. But also, as many kids have come to realize, Mark, is that AI can do your homework for you, it can take your tests, it can write your papers, and it will do a phenomenal job if you allow it to do that. And so what is happening is our teachers are really becoming incredibly frustrated because they don't know what AI, of course, they don't think little Johnny, 7 years old, can write like a philosophy PhD. But that's the paper Johnny turned in, to his second grade teacher. And so these are issues of great concern. If we become, especially our kids become wedded to this stuff, they make it part of their social agenda. They make it their operating system for life. And we've had some very, very tragic circumstances in which young kids basically get addicted to AI, use it as their primary source of information, their primary friend, their confidant. They go to it for, advice. And in some cases, as I document in the book, they've gone off the very deep end and they've committed suicide. So, it's a warning. I'm going to speak to my church soon. I've already, talked to men's groups and the like to help them understand the implications for family, for education, for our economy, and so forth. But I want them to understand the implications at the family, at the root of civilization, what this is going to do, not only to improve the efficiency of our home, but also how it's going to begin to transform our children into something that, if we're not careful, is going to be very dangerous for their future and for our collective future. So education is a big piece of it. I've got an entire chapter that's dedicated to education. And I'm not the only one sounding alarms. There are a lot of alarms out there to be sounded. Now, my concern, Mark, is that AI is not living. It's neutral. It's not evil. It's not good. However, when it's in the hands of people that are evil or demonic, it can be incredibly evil. That is my concern. If you look at where these AI companies are around the world, and how they filled this reservoir of data that is kind of the pool of raw material it goes to answer your questions. If it's biased against Christians, if it's biased against families, if it's biased toward things that we don't like and we don't approve of, and certainly God doesn't approve of, then you're going to have a serious problem. And that's something that people need to understand. That's they need to have an appreciation for the technology, who controls it, and where this might lead.
Yeah. Now, I know in the book, too, you talk about the governments, and you mean governments, not just the government, has an IA mandate, and that would probably be across the board, across the world. And I know you mentioned, of course, we always know about China and what they're up to, but there is a lot of evidence out there that we're really in an AI race, aren't we, that you talk about in the book, about how, some of these countries are trying to develop it to try to get a hands up on the other country, and so that's what we're seeing a lot of now.
That's true. We are in an AI arms race. I know President Trump earlier this year, in May, I believe, launched a strategy, American strategy on AI. This is responding to what the Chinese are doing, what the Russians are doing, what the Europeans are doing, and the like. America is rich in terms of Silicon Valley. Most of the AI upstarts and companies are here. However, there are a lot of them that are in China. And China is a special problem because, as I indicated earlier, Mark, the information you put in your data, in your pool, what's large language models, if it has a bias toward a particular philosophy, that is going to come out through the algorithm, through the recipe, as a result of your inquiry. So if I ask, tell me about who Jesus Christ is, it's going to be biased if it has input from a communist regime that does not believe in the sanctity of our Lord Jesus. And so that, if you ask ChatGPT, it's going to give you a reasonably good answer. But if you ask deep state folks in China, they have a number of what I call GPTs that are like ChatGPT or Claude. You ask them, they're going to say it's a fictional biblical person. They'll give you answers that just don't fit our worldview. So it really comes down to who has fed the data into this LLM that generates a response that is biased. And so what the Chinese are doing is they're trying to flood the world with their ideology, giving away access to their generative AI, their GPTs, as I call them, and that way, much of the underdeveloped part of the world is aligning itself ideologically with the Chinese, whereas in our country, if you want to have a meaningful subscription, you can get a free subscription, but it's not very good. To the ChatGPTs, Gemini, Claude, others, there are many of them, then you have to pay for it. And a lot of people don't want to pay for it except for those that are really enthusiastic about understanding this like I am. And so that's important to understand. So we are in a global war. The implications of this are not only ideological and changing entire nations to favor a socialist communist regime in China, but we aren't doing nearly enough to what I call democratize the AI world and to make sure that the data that people are getting answers to at school, at home, in the workplace, and so forth are really non-biased against, I would say in this case, Christians or the Western, freedoms that we're accustomed to. So that is the nature of the war. And then, of course, there are many other broad implications in this arms race that is just beginning. And unfortunately, I don't think we're doing nearly as well as many people would like to think.
I know you've done a lot of books besides this one, but if someone would want to find out more about this book, AI for Mankind's Future, and its Christian perspective on the high-tech revolution, but how would they go about doing that, Colonel Maginnis?
Well, Mark, it's, of course, available on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, A lot of outlets have it. They can look up my name, Maginnis, and you'll see, some of my interviews. I know Skywatch has a bunch of TV coming out on this. My concern, and the only reason I'm really working in this, is to help Christians understand from a biblical worldview the threat that we're facing. It's a true threat, and there's every aspect of life, from what to include the church life, is going to be directly impacted by this technology. Much like what happened at Babel, much like what happened as a result of the communist Chinese taking over, the entire part of Asia, or the Nazis and so forth. This is a phenomenon that we cannot ignore. We need to understand it, we need to use it right, and we need to protect our hearts against this. And if we don't, we're going to be in terrible trouble.
All right. Well, folks, stay with us. We're going to be back with more in a moment, as we're going to talk about two of the areas that are in this book that I think really affects us the most. So stay tuned, and we'll be back right after this. This is Mark Taylor. If you miss a broadcast of Crosspoint, you can always go to our website at www.kneo.org and click on the programs page. There you can access the current Crosspoint program as well as the last 4 programs that have been aired. Never miss another Crosspoint program again. Go to www.kneo.org today. And welcome back to Crosspoint. I'm your host, Mark Taylor, and my guest today is Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Maginnis, and we're talking about a book, AI for Mankind's Future. And there's a couple of areas that you talk about here in the book. The first one I want to talk to you about is AI and national defense, which we're talking about the military. But, because we've seen things happen even in, the war with Ukraine and Russia. The drone situation has really been seen how big that's being used now. But there's a lot of other things that are coming in AI that really could change the outlook of the battlefield, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think most people have no appreciation. My background is interesting in this. Before I retired from the Pentagon this year, I was a strategist for the operations for the sale of weapons to countries all over the world. And this is what the Department of Defense does. We sell, last year, I think, well over $200 billion, with a B, dollars worth of weapons. Now, you mentioned, Mark, Ukraine. Ukraine is very unique testing ground for a lot of the new technologies, and you mentioned drones. Well, a lot of the drones, of course, initially came from Iran, which is one of the world's largest manufacturers of drones. But we've seen a sophistication that has been embraced quickly by the Ukrainians, in which they actually are using what I call agentic AI. In other words, they program these drones with the autonomy of knowing how to go to a target, how to identify the target, how to liquidate the target, and then to return if it can, if it's not shot down. Now, the autonomy that we have today is unlike the autonomy that we've had not that long ago. And you can orchestrate, and that's a very interesting term, you can orchestrate hundreds of these drones that can be controlled by artificial intelligence, and they can target them on mass formations of tanks or aircraft that are sitting in strategic airfields inside of Russia, which, of course, the Ukrainians did. Now, we have similar technologies, and yet agentic AI is beginning to transform every aspect of the modern battlefield. We'll probably begin to see a lot more of the aircraft that the U.S. military uses to be non-manned. In other words, drones that are given certain missions as agentic AI to get them to the targets and to return and to communicate with all sources of sensors, whether onboard sensors or satellite-connected sensors, far more sophisticated than GPS. So that, certainly on the ground, we have, years ago, I wrote a book on future war in which I started to really imply that these things are coming. But we're finding that the modern battlefield is very sophisticated. It's less concentrated with human beings making some of these decisions and more in the hands of these drones or these AI energized programs making, these autonomous decisions. And that's a very scary possibility, especially when you consider that some nations, like the Russians and the Chinese and others, are beginning to turn over some command and control to these non-organic entities that are going to make very decisive decisions that could cause, very serious harm across the world. So, I've written extensively about this over the years. I think Christians need to appreciate that, this stuff is not tomorrow. It's today, and it's going to get worse.
Yeah. Now, another area, it's in chapter 15 of the book, I believe that you talk about how AI is transforming our political process. So what can we expect there? We probably know we're already seeing a lot there, but this could also be used. You could use a lot of trickery with AI.
Oh yeah. Well, if anybody's been on Facebook recently, they know about deep fakes, and political campaigns are often filled with all sorts of, let's say, deep fakes. They're stretching the truth, or they're creating, images that just aren't true. Avatars. In other words, they create an image of someone that you recognize, speaking through their mouth, saying things that really shock you. Well, you can do that. I took a course at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology on generative AI. And so I dealt with some of the technology that would allow us to take and create an avatar for a political campaign that looks like the candidate that I'm opposing. I can make them say anything I want, and I can make it sound incredibly effective. And yet, they can deny it, but once it's out on social media, it's hard to pull it back. And that's the sort of thing that we're being inundated today. Not only is it the political campaigns that are beginning to spread untruths, but you have legislative processes. A lot of legislation is being written by AI today, much like laws are being written by AI. And yes, they make mistakes. They hallucinate. That's what the term in the industry is. In other words, they lie. They make things up. But they'll put this in legislation, and some people will never know because they don't know anything about the legislation. Or they can write speeches, and they can even deliver the speech if you want using an avatar that looks like the real person. And so, what this really is about is, how do I know what the truth is? Because I can't go to social media and I see someone I recognize, but they're saying things I just don't agree with. And that's inconsistent with what they've done in the past. So the political process is tainted seriously by this, because most of us don't know what is truth and what's not truth, because it's across our social media, or it comes to our attention through an email or through a text or something, and it's really beginning to test our patience and our discernment, and that's really critical going forward.
Now, in chapter 10 of the book, you talk about AI and raw materials, and we've heard, especially President Trump, talk a lot about raw materials and the need we need to sign these different agreements, and we need to be getting these certain materials from these other countries, or protecting them from other countries, because we need them, desperately in making. Is it AI that needs a lot of this raw material work, and they're seeing that?
Well, yeah. What we need in AI is, of course, the sophisticated activities is rare earth elements, and that's really the big contest today. Your cell phone, it has rare earth elements. Sophisticated electronics that we use in weapons. Certainly the computer that I have in my desk at home has AI or has raw materials that are rare earth metals. These are, of course, mostly controlled by the Chinese. And and they also go into making the graphic processing units, the heart of AI, which are GPUs. Just like your computer has a central processing unit, well, the AI and these big data farms that we're creating, I know where I live in Northern Virginia, these giant buildings are full of these GPUs that, store all of this data that I've talked about, and I use my algorithms, my recipes, to dip into that and pull it out. Well, these things are massive consumers of electricity, maybe 10% by the year 2030 of the entire U.S. electrical requirements, millions of gallons of fresh water to keep them cool so they can operate. And so, we depend upon rare earth metals to make the electronics that we human beings in this modern era are dependent upon, and yet they're constrained by those that find it, process it, and make it into something that eventually becomes an important element of our lives. I deal with other deal with other materials. It can be used extensively in modern farming. It certainly is used in other venues where we're talking about manufacturing. And of course, that really goes to the whole issue of how many of our jobs are going to be robbed as a result of AI. And I will tell you, the AI world, in which I've become part of, as a reporter at least, is very anxious because in order to make a lot of money, and there's a lot of money involved in this stuff, they have to begin to replace jobs. And that's exactly what we're beginning to see. And so, it's used for raw material development, farming, manufacturing, certainly mining and the like, but it goes far beyond that.
Now, Chapter 14 of the book talks about the entertainment industry. So, again, here's people involved with AI, and, they've got the people's, attention there with the entertainment world. How much is that now going to be used as a somewhat of a weapon to lead people in the wrong direction?
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of songs are being written and orchestrated by AI today. And, of course, that goes to the whole issue of copyright, and that's why Hollywood and Nashville and places where they produce music and broadcast and the like, there's a lot of copyright infringement, and yet, some genuine artists are beginning to use AI as an assistant, as a supplement. And so, whether it's in music or in movies, in which there's a lot of AI used today to, they've actually produced entire, feature movies with AI in some circumstances, and it's getting better absolutely every day. Whether it's the entertainment aspect or it's writing for the news, certain companies have actually insisted that their reporters, use AI to draft their media, their reports, like Axios has mandated this, and they're beginning to have fewer and fewer reporters as a direct result, because AI, you can go on there and say, okay, write me an article about, here are the details, but make sure it's well vetted and that it is in this particular style, and you can give it a style, and it can pump something out in just a flash. And that's the sort of stuff that is beginning to impact the multimedia world, certainly the social media world, the broadcast television, you see a lot of AI every day, and you may not realize it, but it's out there. And then, of course, the whole publication industry is being transformed in ways that none of us expected only a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So now, again, if somebody wanted to get a copy of this book, how would you recommend they do that?
Well, it's everywhere. It's on Amazon, certainly. You can go to Barnes & Noble's. I know Target. There's a whole list of places that sell it out there. Certainly Skywatch, which is Defender Publishing, they make it available. So it's out there. Mark, I want Christians to begin to understand what this is that we're facing, because it can be used for good, but it can also be used for great evil, and we need to protect ourselves and our families.
Yeah. All right, folks, stay with us. We got more of this interesting conversation coming up.
Offering words to encourage, teaching to inspire, and truth that defines real life.
This is who we are, what we offer, and what you can expect.
91.7 The Word.
You're listening to Crosspoint, and I'm Mark Taylor, your host. My guest today is Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Maginnis. We're talking about AI for mankind's future, and very interesting conversation we're having. And so now let's get down to the players of this AI. Now, somebody has to always have a boss. There has to be a general place that somebody's in charge, in control of something. But does this not look like the perfect setup for the potential of the end times weaponry of Satan?
No doubt.
You talk about it here in the book.
Well, it is. First of all, Mark, people need to, as I said in the previous two segments, this is all over. Customer service, chatbots, virtual assistants are out there. It's all AI. Search engines that you use that are like Google or Bing. Healthcare. You're getting your diagnosis. Your doctors are using AI. They're using it to make new drugs. And there's also robotic surgery today, and it's being used today, and it's AI-driven. Finances. If you deal with a bank, most banks have an AI that is, helping you with fraud detection, risk scoring, certainly trading. Algorithms are out there. Transportation. We have driverless cars that are beginning to be quite the thing. You've got Ubers that are using AI. GPS, of course, is really AI. You have security surveillance at home. You have policing that is trying to identify bad guys that is using AI. The retail, the e-commerce world is, really embracing apps. You use apps every day if you have an iPhone that is really wrapped around AI. Manufacturing, we talked about. Education, tutors. An AI can be a great tutor for certain subjects. And, of course, you have agriculture. You have the creative arts that we talked about in the last segment, the military in the last segment. So the players that are behind this are really the key. Who is it that is building these large language models and putting the data in there? Are they just draining the Internet and filling it with billions and billions of pieces of information, or are they putting biased information? There are companies that formed these LLMs that are really the reservoir of information that these AI use. They are often informed by ethicists. But who are the ethicists? Are they communists, or are they leftists, or are they Christians? Are they true evangelical Christians? Don't know in some cases. And so you end up with data that is being used to answer the questions that impact every aspect that I just went through that can be biased against us. Now, if the AI doesn't have an answer, it's still going to confidently tell you what it thinks, and it's going to come across as very confident. It's going to hallucinate. It's going to lie to you in some cases. And what you need to do is say, are you sure of that? And I do it every day when I use these systems, because I find out that too often I call it lying, but they call it hallucinate. They make up stuff. And it looks very, very credible. So you need to be careful as to who is controlling this. And in fact, in the next book that's coming out in this trilogy that I'm working on, the first one is AI for Mankind's Future. The second one will address who are really the key players in today's world that are controlling this stuff. Because it is just every aspect of your life. You can't escape it. So what you need to know is who is behind this and how you can control it and protect yourself and your family, your workplace, and your future.
Now, in section six of the book, I was talking there that AI is really playing, I mean, I can see it laying out the perfect rise for the Antichrist, because is not AI going to be what the Antichrist probably uses?
Well, there's no doubt, as I look at Revelation, that it is a perfect match with what could be, the end times. Now, I'm not a prophet, don't claim to be one, but I do read the scriptures, and I see the hand of AI that could easily be, say, Revelation 13:11 through 14, the false prophet. We think of the false prophet. What is the false prophet's job? He's a miracle worker. He learns, or he leads the world to worship the Antichrist. Now, I've already talked on this program in one previous segment about avatars and how they look very real. They say things that are very compelling. Who says that a future might not be the false prophet that is an avatar that is being informed by super intelligent singularity, that is speaking and doing what appears to be miracles to modern man, and promoting the Antichrist. That's a real possibility, I think. He's persuasive, he's incredibly commanding, and he sways the masses in ways that, as the scripture says, we haven't seen any in the past. And so, yes, I do believe that a future AI could be the very assistant, the very false prophet that is right doing the Antichrist work. In fact, I believe that the infrastructure for what we read about the mark of the beast is totally AI. Just go through what that means and what the infrastructure AI is providing today. Who's going to buy and sell? It's going to know who you are because it's already collected your biometrics. It knows what you look like. It knows your voice. It knows your bank account. It knows everything that you've done, and it profiles you. And we've seen the indicators of this already in places like communist China that have millions and millions of cameras all over the country. And so they have all this data put together, and they see you. They identify your face. They identify your voice on the telephone, and they automatically know where you are, what you're doing, and they can control what you can and cannot do. For instance, if you are of a political persuasion or an ideology, like an evangelical Christian, they don't want you to get on this train, so they'll deny you a ticket. And they can do that through their AI systems that are in place. Now, that's not quite where we are today in the United States. However, that can't be too far away if we're not very, very careful.
So, towards the end of the book a little bit here, you talk about Christians called to be human, not AI-powered avatars. And it says artificial intelligence should be regulated both intentionally and domestically. Corporations must be held to account to oversee their AI-related developments as well. However, individual citizens must decide how much they're going to join in this technological revolution. This broad journey through AI's domains highlights one clear reality. We cannot ignore this revolution. Christians must now prayerfully decide how to respond, not to be passive observers, but as faithful witnesses. Tell us what you want us to do. What do you think we need to be doing there?
Well, you need to be a human, and I know that's flippant, but we don't need to put all our decisions in the hands of a non-organic, non-Christian, machine. And yet, we're finding that more and more every day. And that's the scary reality. All this is, and this is a bit technical, but all AI does is it takes my words, runs it through this recipe, transforms it into zeros and ones, data, and then it produces, based upon a vast inventory of what I've talked about, all this data, into a probability of what the best answer is to my inquiry. And so it's about probabilities. Is truth about probabilities? Is what we humans need to recognize that it's not. All the AI is doing is giving me a high probability as to what the response should be, but that's not necessarily truth. And so I think I use the illustration of Daniel in the book of Daniel. Daniel managed to figure out how to live in Babylon and not be a Babylonian and worship the Babylonian god of Nebuchadnezzar. He learned how to deny himself their food, and God allowed him to be healthy in spite of that. He learned their language, but did not become a worshiper of the golden idol that Nebuchadnezzar put together. So we need to figure out how to be human in this AI world in which we're inundated day in and day out in every aspect of our lives with these machines that are telling us this is right and this is right, this is what you need to buy and this is what you don't need to buy. So it's discerning how to be human in an AI-controlled world, which is quite difficult, and it's going to become more difficult. So your eyes have to turn back to Christ and to the Bible. Otherwise, you become you begin to think like a machine, you begin to act like a machine, and yet there are those AI futurists that are going to sell you in some ideas that I talk about in here, and I will in the future, that they're going to offer you salvation from the AI. They're going to offer you an eternity from AI. You've got to understand what they're talking about, and you have to be firmly grounded in God's Word to be able to refute that. Otherwise, you and your family and your church will become part of the problem and not part of the solution.
Well, isn't it true that there's an AI Jesus that you can go to and ask questions and stuff like that even now?
Unfortunately, there are apps that will look like Jesus as avatars, that will sound like many of us think maybe Jesus sounded like. He'll speak in ways that, that really sounds biblical, but it's not. And so, yes, that's inundating much of contemporary world. There are churches which have, and I record in the book, examples of where they look at an avatar on a screen and that's their worship service. They deliver sermons. They deliver counseling. They do all of this in the name that they would like us to believe is Jesus Christ, but that's not true. And so pastors, members of the congregation, fellow believers, they've got to become cognizant of what this stuff is, how it can be used persuasively by our enemy. That's why we need to be human beings, followers of Christ, and push away from the evil, but at the same time recognize that this can be used for good. And it's not going to be easy in some cases. Sometimes we're going to have to cut the stuff off totally and vacate that whole realm of artificial intelligence to really recover the humanity that we need to, we really need to preserve and to hold precious, because we have a soul. AI does not have a soul. We have a destiny. AI does not have a destiny, and yet it would be persuasive in causing us to believe that what we have come to believe as believers in Christ is not the direction that we need to go, that AI can give us We can port our souls into electrons and live forever. That's what those AI futurists, in some cases, want you to believe. So it's fraught with danger, and we need to be aware of that.
Yep. So, folks, the book we're talking about is AI for Mankind's Future. We've been talking today with Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Maginnis. The book's put out by Defender Publishing. And, Lieutenant Colonel, tell us how people can find out more if they, are looking for the book. Where would you suggest they go to find it?
You can always get it at Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Nobles. And, I think Walmart has it. There are a lot of outlets all over the world. It's not just here in the United States. All over the world, you can get it. And Mark, I really want Christians to become aware of what this stuff is. You can use it right, and you can use it in a very wrong way. And so that's really what the intent is. What is it, and how is it impacting us today? And that's the reality of what we're dealing with.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us here on Crosspoint.
Mark, it's been my pleasure.
Well, a great interview we had today there with Robert Maginnis. A lot of information, and that's the kind of information that's going to keep growing and growing and growing, because that's the times we live in. And that all relates to the book in my other hand, the Holy Bible, the book that's got all the information you need for life. It will tell you how to do life. It's the Bible. You'll find it to be the encouragement you need. It's inspired words of God that are never outdated. It contains the most important words you're ever going to read and certainly ever be following. Be sure and join us again next time as we begin to discuss issues that are affecting the church. Have a great week and allow God to use you for His purposes so that greater things can be done. Make your life count in God's plans for eternity. I'm Mark Taylor.
Crosspoint is a program produced in Studio 101 at KNEO Radio. Not all of the views on Crosspoint reflect those of the management or staff of KNEO. You may contact the Crosspoint program at 10827 Highway 86 East, Neosho, Missouri 64850, or by email crosspoint@kneo.org. You can hear Crosspoint 4 times a week: Saturday morning at 1, Saturday afternoon at 2, Saturday evening at 9, and Sunday evening at 7. You can also listen anytime online at kneo.org.